Ben Carter smiled at the stiffening corpse that lay bloody at his feet. Anyone else would have buried it sooner, but not Ben. He wanted to gloat a while, wanted to bask in his grisly triumph as long as he possibly could, for the memory of it, he knew, would not satisfy him as much as staring down at the lifeless body of the man whom he had loathed and despised for so long. Oh, how hatred can sour a man's very soul. They had been friends once, very close friends, that is, until they both fell for the same woman. Colin Moore, the man whose corpse he now kicked in anger, had won out and married the woman. She had died soon after the wedding, but that didn't matter to Ben. His hatred for Colin had continued to well up inside him until it tormented and embittered his every thought. He had hidden his true feelings well, for no one, least of all Colin, had ever suspected that beneath his warm smile could lay such an all-consuming contempt. His plans had been well laid. For years he had revised them in his head until, at last, he had devised the perfect murder. No one knew that Colin had come to his house tonight, and at best, the most the police would do was come calling with a few uncomfortable questions once Colin turned up missing. Who would ever even think that he had murdered his old friend? Yes, he had monotonously worked it down to the most minute detail. He had gone to Colin's house earlier in the week, at a time when he knew he could slip in and out unnoticed by Colin's neighbors, and invited him to drop by this weekend. He had offered to show Colin the well-stocked wine cellar, and a heavy blow from a crowbar had done the rest. No one would ever know. Ben lived alone, so there was no threat of anyone except him ever coming down here. The key to the door was kept on a chain around his neck, so no one could gain access without a lot of hard work, without his knowledge. Ben smiled arrogantly as he picked up the trowel and went back to his work. It was such a simple idea that Edgar Allan Poe had inspired, sealing Colin up behind the extra section of wall which was to become his tomb. In a few minutes he would lock the door to the dank cellar and have a toast before going to bed, a toast to the perfect murder. When the wall was completed, he stepped back, admiring his work. He was startled out of his reverie by the sound of the heavy oaken door which led to the cellar crashing shut. Quickly he dashed to the door. It must have been the wind, he thought, because he was completely alone. Just as he reached out for the doorknob, he heard the lock tumblers click into place. "Hello? Who's out there?" he shouted, but he heard no sound from outside the door. He spun on his heels as he heard a maniacal laugh behind him, but there was no one there. The terrible laugh grew louder. The terror swelled as Ben realized that the laugh was coming from behind the wall, from the tomb of Colin Moore. But Colin Moore couldn't be alive! In a state of frantic desperation, Ben bashed his shoulder against the door, but to no avail. The laughter grew louder still as Ben continued to fling himself desperately against the locked door. A slow and agonizing death awaited Ben now. Of that he was certain. He lived alone, so there would be no one to let him out. The dreadful cold in the cellar would kill him before the night had passed anyway. His knees became like rubber, buckling under him as he buried his face in his hands, and the maniacal laughter of Colin continued to echo toward him from behind the sealed wall. The end.